Welcome to Season 2 of Voices of Customer Experience. I'm your host, Mary Drumond, and I'm excited to be back and proud to bring you the very best of customer experience, behavior economics, data analytics, and design. We've got incredible guests lined up on the show this season, so make sure to subscribe or follow us on social for updates. Voices of Customer Experience is brought to you by Worthix. Discover your worth at worthix.com. On today's season premiere, we have Brian Solis. Brian Solis is a digital analyst, celebrated keynote speaker, and author of 7 books. He studies disruptive technology and its impact on business at Altimeter Group. His work is credited with influencing the early digital and social marketing landscape. Thank you for joining us today, Brian.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
I wanted, for our listeners' sake, if you could just give us a rundown, a little bit of your background, and especially what your mission is for customer experience.
Well, my mission for customer experience is sort of the evolution of the first part of the question. It's not what I set out to do, nor is any of this, I guess, what I set out to do. But long story short is that back in the early 90s, when I entered into the technology realm, I just noticed the emphasis of conversations and innovation around technology, and over the years watched technology accelerate, watched the consumerization of technology accelerate and proliferate, and then at some point really started to observe how people were changing as a result of technology and started to document that and report on that, and then realized that as technology was continuing to evolve, as people were changing, it was creating a massive gap, and that gap was getting bigger and bigger and bigger between how companies operate, small and large, and governments, educational institutions, et cetera, and how people were evolving and how their changes, how they were changing their preferences, their behaviors, so on, their values, their norms, expectations, everything. And then it just somehow became my work to document what I call digital Darwinism, the evolution of technology and society, and to help anyone who cares close that gap. Because what was becoming clearer and clearer is that people, you and me, were not going to go backwards, and nor were we going to be the bridge builders back to dated experiences. And customer experience was a natural extension of that work, because it's super critical in understanding that if you are a traditional business or a legacy business and you are still trying to engage customers on a platform of those legacy standards and even mindsets, that we would have to find a way to help deliver the experiences that customers want. And the challenge, though, wasn't so much about technology. It was about being able to even see and appreciate how people were changing if you yourself were a decision maker and not the person you were trying to reach.
Awesome. Well, you consider yourself a futurist, right? And I've actually heard this a lot of late. What do you mean when you say you're a futurist? Does it mean you're constantly looking for advancements and innovation and trying to apply that into customers' lives or into your own life? What do you mean by that?
A futurist is something that I actually don't call myself. I actually believe that that's a title, like thought leader, that you have to earn, and someone else has to call you it. I'm not a futurist by training, more of a futurist by practice, in that it's not my role to try to predict the future, although everybody wants to know what's happening in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And you can do your best to connect the dots between what is today and where it's going. And then you can also connect the dots between what is today and what should be. And they're very different exercises. But in that role, what I really try to do is understand where society's going, how it's going to evolve, where businesses are going, or anything really, and try to build strategies that connect the dots between what should be and not what will be. And maybe sometimes it's a bit of both, but to do that, there's a lot of social science involved, psychology, sociology, anthropology, ethnography, all kinds of things that are even beyond my pay grade, that you really have to be human-centered to care, because everybody can talk about augmented reality, virtual reality. We could talk about wearables. We could talk about embeddables in our bodies, where that's all going to go. We could talk about
nanotechnology.
yeah, exactly. And so it's not as much a technology conversation as it is what happens when you as a human being change, and you veer course with what I call the centers of reference. So if you make a decision today based on the world that you know, with how you know it. So, for example, a simple example I use is Uber. Everybody always likes to talk about Uber, but I use it as a more of a reference around the Kodak moment, which is every thought leader about innovation will always use Blockbuster or Kodak or Uber as examples of
Or Toys R Us more recently, right?
yes, as examples of innovation and disruption. But the story there is not so much, Amazon disrupting Toys R Us. Surely it did. It was, and Kodak being disrupted by digital. I mean, it's not that simple. It's more of what happens when your customer changes so much that your model is not only outmoded, but it's counterintuitive to how someone behaves and makes decisions. So that part is actually the hardest part, is being able to see people different than you. So with Uber, if you use Uber for any amount of time, it just becomes a way of life. And the thing about that is that you're not going to go back to taxis. You're going to, now your center of reference has moved. Your standards have moved. And
the next move is going forward, like you said, right?
Exactly. So the next move is always, so for example, one of the things that I studied was how long is too long to wait for an Uber or Lyft before you open a competitive app. And you don't even realize you do it. And 5 years ago, you would never have even thought this would be something that somebody would study. But I use it as a reference of, this is how crazy things are getting, and this is how far away their center of reference is from where you think or assume their center of reference is. So, for example, that number in New York is 6 minutes. If you're using Uber and a car is more than 6 minutes away, you're going to open Lyft to see if there's a car closer, because why would you wait more than 6 minutes for a car to come to you where you're standing?
Well, you're right. It really is really quick, and we do kind of lose track of that. I remember the other day my kid asked me if I was alive when fat TVs existed, and that was his word, fat TVs. And when I said yes, he followed up with, "And were you alive when the dinosaurs walked the earth?" And I was, that was a hard one. but we, it changes so fast that we lose track. I remember, and I'm a millennial, so I grew up with the technology. I grew up with a mobile phone, and I remember that using a Nokia phone and having to press, I don't know which button 4 times to get an S out. That was just normal for us. We accepted that. And nowadays we wouldn't even dream of that. Nowadays in a best case scenario, we use, voice or voice prediction or something like that. And who knows what's coming next, right? So it really is, the speed of change is really ridiculously fast at this point.
Absolutely. And it's also the impact of what it means to you. And again, those centers of reference are really important, because when it comes to customer experience, if you track it back to what businesses are doing, they're moving to the cloud. Digital transformation is a big deal now. CX is the number one driver for advanced digital transformation. You have people within the organization who are making decisions about the future of customer decision making based on the customer standards of the past. They're not making decisions based on, well, if the consumer can only wait less than 6 minutes for an Uber, what does our journey look like? Instead, they're bolting new things onto the journey to try to be adaptable, or at least available to today's expectations, without understanding what those human expectations and preferences and values and norms are. And so this is a really big deal, because in a lot of my research with Google, I've had the opportunity to work with them for several years. They give me access to all kinds of data and research that I get to translate into, did you know that your app, your website, all of this, how someone even goes about making a decision, that their discovery process is nothing like the funnel that we're making decisions off of, and that they do X, Y, and Z. And they don't have any clue, because the problem with it is that all of these conversations are naturally biased. We have cognitive bias based on what we think we know versus what's happening, and we're making decisions based on what we think we know. Even when we get data that shows us it's something else, we see it in the way that we want to see it. So the most effective data transformation stories right now are actually being handled by artists, people
Yeah.
who look at this purely from an era of behavior, or want to be inspired or informed by that behavior, rather than try to see it the way that they would know it.
Voices of Customer Experience is brought to you by Worthix. If you're interested in customer experience, behavior economics, or data science, follow Worthix on social media or subscribe to our blog for the best content on the web.
Let me ask you something. For those who are artists, who are designers, who work so hard in mapping out customer journeys and the works, do you think it's possible to predict or even understand all of the biases to a point where we can actually perfectly plan a customer journey? Or do you think that's impossible because there's so many variables that are constantly changing, like you said, to a point where it's impossible, and most of the time we're kind of looking in the rear view mirror as opposed to looking forward? What do you think about that?
I always likened the customer journey to Disney, how they approached movies, or Pixar, how they approach movies, through a storyboarding process and character development. In fact, when I was writing my last book, X, I hired a Pixar storyboard artist. His name was Nick Sung, to teach me the art of storyboarding and character development, because I needed to understand how to become not just empathetic, but more, I guess, what's the right word? Humble, to be able to answer that question. Because I think what happens is that we're naturally biased, and and the irony of bias is that we don't actually see the bias because we're
Right.
biased. Uh, I had this great conversation with Julie Rieger of Fox yesterday, and she's probably one of the most advanced and impressive people I've ever met in answering this question. So be sure to follow her work as well. She has hired artists to help her with data. She's a very incredible, thunderous personality. But to hear someone like her say, the first thing I had to do was check my ego at the door, and to recognize that this is all about seeing and being inspired, and not trying to bring all of your experiences to this moment. That's where we get in trouble. All of these challenges are actually human. It comes down to egos and politics and self-preservation and fear and all kinds of things. But what she does is she realizes that, look, all of this is just here to help us, not threaten us. And if you could change the narrative to not only go and find what you don't know and see what you didn't see before, but be able to then translate it to others in a non-threatening way, to say like, oh my gosh, we have to do this. It's more like, wow, people are just looking for this. And here's the evidence of how we can connect dots to deliver better experiences. And that's just, at the very least, fixing what's broken is going to generate more revenue. And then if we could get good at it, we could start to lure in people who we don't even reach today. Imagine the possibilities if we grow our business that way. And it's a different type of story, but you have to be able to start with a blank slate, or imagine with a blank slate. Now,
I
with
think
that
that's the
said,
secret to world peace, honestly. I think that if we can achieve that on all planes, seriously, I can't see the reason for wars. I can't see anything going wrong, right? Because if you manage to check all of that, your culture, your baggage, your experience, everything that you brought with you to this point, all your traumas, I mean, it's impossible to not look at someone else's story and not understand, right?
well, I have done work for the Department of Defense. I've tried to work for political candidates with that very premise, to share that once you open this door, you realize that I used to say that there's two ways to inspire, or there's two ways to influence behavior. You can inspire it or you can manipulate it. And that, I think what we've seen in the last election, for example, was highly manipulated. And so is, traditional advertising. And so, but there's another way to do it, which is to inspire the behavior. And this is what we're learning, is that people, whether you like it or not, are moving in a new direction. And the more you try to hold it back or force it into this view of the world that you have, whether that's a customer journey or politics, it's going to work for a little while because you can manipulate things, but at some point it doesn't, and it becomes disrupted. It's like, so for example, when Uber comes in and disrupts taxis, or Amazon comes in and disrupts everything, it's like you've had a chance. You could see what people are doing and how they're changing and what they want, and you can inspire things in a more productive and lucrative, if you want to use that word, direction.
Well, absolutely. Well, I know that we have a limited amount of time today. And one thing that I really enjoy asking people who are kind of on that front line dealing with the, CX on a day-to-day basis. And I know that you, Brian, because of your work, you've got access to so many incredible minds, and you're able to bounce off your ideas on so many brilliant people. So I have to ask you, what do you see as the future of customer experience, or what do you at least hope the future of customer experience looks like?
Well, I think we have to come up with a common definition of what customer experience is.
Absolutely. I have that here on my list of questions, but it's normally such a long question.
Yeah, well, look, I try to tackle this with writing a book around experience design. And what you quickly realize is that it's actually, as much as we talk about being customer centric, we're not. We are stakeholder centric, shareholder centric. We are beholden to whatever the legal department says we can do and cannot do, or whatever the CFO says we can do and cannot do.
A corporate model, right? The way that it's all been set up for, maybe hundreds of years.
That's right. That's right. In fact, if you look at just say customer service, which is the biggest Achilles heel in most customer experiences today, I mean, those models were designed and scaled from the 1950s and 1960s. And every new technology like conversational commerce, machine learning, chatbots, you name it, are all being stuffed into that model without reimagining it. So for example, I just wrote a paper called Contact Center 2.0, which was, what if you could use all of these new technologies as you migrate to the cloud? What if you started to reimagine processes and policies at the same time? Because that's what innovation is all about, is anybody could take technology and use it. What else could you do to enliven it? And so that's coming back to your question around customer experience. Look, I think the most common definition I found is it is the sum of all engagements a customer has with your company throughout their life cycle. So it's not just one moment, it's all the moments. And so if you're an orchestra, you're not going to let each instrument play its own way, or you're not going to treat it like silos. You're going to have vision and leadership and the capacity to make those things work together so that the audience or the customer has a pleasant, a wonderful, an intuitive, and even aspirational experience. So then what does the word experience mean? This one is where people get thrown off all over the place, because then you have to really start thinking about human beings. What is an experience? An experience is, and believe it or not, it took me forever to figure out how to convey this when I'm writing a book about experience, which was, it's an emotional, it's a sensory reaction to a moment. And it could be measured.
The feel, right?
Exactly, the feel. And that could be measured by how you react, what you take away with you. And the reality is that someone's going to feel something in every moment. And we outlandishly leave that to chance. And we know that in many of our touch points today, people leave feeling upset, horrible, all kinds of things. And we do nothing about it because we just assume that, well, they'll just come back, and we have to throw margins and everything. But look, I'll tell you, and I'll leave you with this. One of the biggest, most humbling experiences I've had in my life trying to answer that question was to realize that I was almost about to be as guilty as everyone else that I'm trying to help, which was, I was writing a book about how to design experiences in a connected economy and how digital is changing customer expectations, preferences, etc. And I was going to do it in a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, hey, there's some irony there for you. How I scrapped my original manuscript and realized that what I should do is what I'm asking everybody to do, and that is, what is the experience that people intuitively want, for example, when they're sitting down and reading a book or sitting in front of a laptop or a phone and gathering information. And it turns out that the mobile device has changed everybody's brain for better or for worse. And in a lot of my research, I see a lot of the worst side of it, but that's another conversation. But it is literally rewiring your brain, how you process information, how you make decisions, what you hold on to, what you don't. So those were insights that I spent time studying and reverse engineered to see if I could apply those mobile design insights into paper. How could you take the UX and UI of a lot of what's being called as, it's called persuasive design. Could you take that and apply it to paper to get someone to want to read more, to get them to turn pages more, to get them to look at a piece of paper and blur the line between, am I looking at my phone or an iPad? And the exercise was super humbling, but it was also the right thing to do, to see and show this is what it takes to design an experience. You have to understand what's at the heart and what's in the mind and what's in the soul of the person you're trying to reach. What did Uber do to someone's brain and their expectations and their standards? What did all of these things do? And take those insights and reimagine touch points and engagement and then click paths. And what I think the best thing I could leave you with is that you don't have to recreate the whole funnel right now or the whole journey all in one. You just understand that there are opportunities to fix certain touch points, introduce new touch points, but don't just stick them into the rest of the journey where maybe this one is a nice experience and it's modernized, but now I have to click to the next thing, which is a website, which is going to suck and not in any way, shape, or form operate against the way my brain works. Just recreate click paths. And this is what a lot of my work with Google is showing, is that those who just create even the smallest of click paths to get someone from A to B quickly win.
Yeah.
And those insights then spill over into what else can we do? Because now you're starting to show ROI, of which then grant you the keys to the kingdom. And
you create a workable model that you can then replicate, right? Because you understand
exactly
how it works. Well, Brian, I've personally read your book. It's a beautiful book. It is easy to read, and there is a very natural process that goes through flipping the pages. And I, just appreciate that some pages are just an image, and it kind of gives your mind a moment to rest and ponder what we just read before moving on to the next subject. So I think you did a really good job with that. So
thank you.
Here's my recommendation to all of our listeners to go out and grab Brian Solis's book X, and it won't be a waste of time at all. It's time very well spent. And thank you so much for being on here. I know your schedule's really busy, and I hope our paths cross again in the future with a little bit more time, because I've got another 2 pages of questions here for you based on what I read on your book and how I'd like to pick your brain a bit more.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to a future conversation.
Thank you, Brian. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Voices of Customer Experience. If you'd like to hear more or get a full podcast summary, visit the episode details page or go to blog.worthix.com/podcasts. This episode of Voices of Customer Experience was hosted and produced by Mary Drumond, co-hosted by James Conrad, and edited by Nick Gomez. Blog copy and summary by Emma Waldron.